Yep, that's us.
That's us.
Yeah, so we are educators. My name is Tina. This is Harpreet Kaur. I don't know how many of you know about Harpreet, but she wears many hats in the field of education. And she is a mentor to many people. She's my own personal mentor, but she's also a mentor to a lot of students in her teacher role and her role at the board, in the Peel Board, which is in Brampton, Ontario. She's influenced many teachers, many leaders within the system, again, many students there through the programs that she's held. I know, I'm going to honor time, I promise. I'm gonna honor time. But I just want to make sure that she's well represented in this presentation and in her current role at the ministry. So she has a role now at the province, working with policies, and hopefully that comes through this presentation.
I think all that, more about Tina, and let's get on with the presentation. So Tina and I both did a presentation on looking at how do Sikh female teachers create agency for Sikh students, girls, and families. So both of us are at our heart teachers and educators, and this is our passion, this is what we love to do. And so we both found a way to look at this question, how are we going to explore it? So we're both graduating from our masters in November, so we just both got it in Masters of Education. Look at those claps all around. This is great. And so let's deconstruct our question a little bit. So when we're talking about Sikh female teachers, we're looking at the context of being teachers in the Ontario public education system. We're both in the Ontario public education system. And we also recognize that we, as Sikhs, may not be represented in that system. We are being oppressed in that system as teachers, but also are navigating our own way, and that we're also supporting the navigation of other Sikh students in our schools and in who we teach. And when we're talking about creating agency, we also recognize that we are in a position of power, and that our position of power as teachers in a classroom or in a system can help create agency for our students, can create agency for our Sikh girl students in that. And we'll talk about the different ways that we've tried and attempted and at times been successful as well. And when we're talking about families, we are also talking about that whole idea of where does some of that oppression come from? Like, oppression comes from schools, but it also may come from certain patriarchal practices. Okay, so our theoretical framework. So we're going to split this one up, right? So our theoretical framework comes from the fact that it's a critical race perspective. There has been that conversation just that Sangeeta was saying, that looking at race as a faith, faith has been racialized. And so that becomes really important in the education system. So I'm going to just go into that slide a bit. So we'll talk about that afterwards. So when we're looking at critical race, when we think about our schools, and we're looking at faith as an ism in our schools, we're not looking to see, does racism exist, or does faith as an ism exist? We know it's in our institutions. We know that there's discrimination in our institutions. We know that there's voices that are unheard. We want to see how it plays out. We want to know how it looks, what are those things that are happening, that when that institutionalized discrimination is there, how we can navigate through that and empower those kids that are in it, and ourselves as teachers, because it's institutionalized, that we also have to navigate that. And how do we find empowerment for ourselves as well? And so we also are taking a social justice lens, and social justice lens is that we have to take action moving forward to tackle that institutionalized discrimination.
And through that, we also are looking at policies and the text that the policies create in the system of education, because it's an area where there can be growth, and there's an area of influence and where we can affect change, which is our lens in education. I did want to pay a little bit more attention to our definition of Sikh feminism, because it was a question that came up a couple of times throughout the day. Through our lens, Sikh feminism is really looking at equities. So it's not a gender male versus female, an equality between the two groups. It is an equitable way between all groups of humans. So this also includes homosexual groups. It also includes creed. It also, everything, LGBT, that whole group, it's equity. And it's serving and creating space so that everyone is included. So it's not just the male and the female.
And when we talk about equality and equity, the difference meaning in the sense that everybody can't be treated the same. Right now, there's been some people that have been not in places of power, and so therefore different services have to be provided to those people or to that group to be able to give maybe equity of access or to provide that stepping, right? Because we have this image that even in education, that we have a level playing field. We don't have a level playing field. Policies, curriculum, the whole school, the interactions, the way parents are engaged, all of those things in the education system are focused towards creating success for a certain type of group, middle class white. And so we have to really recognize that when we're looking at creating those positions or equity, when we're looking at that, we're looking at trying to create giving and creating programs or curriculum that would create that access. Okay, so we've talked about equity, we talked about that. So what do we do? So we both started off writing our own autoethnography. So we went and we wrote our narratives of what it felt like. So Tina wrote some and I wrote some. And so it was an amazing experience to just write about our experience in the education system. Our experience as, we both grew up in Ontario, so we also went to school in Ontario, and we also then became teachers in Ontario, right? So we wrote about our experiences as kids, being in the system and what it felt like, and then we also wrote stories about what it felt like then now being teachers. And so that was very interesting for us, and it revealed a lot. So, it brought back things that I never even, amazing memories that then we had the opportunity to analyze. Part of our, then we took it a little bit further. And you want to talk to that because they're all your students that we interviewed.
Just before I get to that though, it's important to create this context through narrative. We spoke about that a little bit before. But before either one of us were able to do more scholarly work around Sikhi and around feminism and around education, we found that there was an absence of information. So we almost had to backtrack our thinking to find what our context was, to figure out what did our students go through, what did we as students go through, what are our students currently going through, what are teachers going through. There was nothing, there was no existence of any of this context in scholarly work. So this was really important, this was foundational, to take these autoethnographics and these narratives that were written and make sense of this. And the hope and the idea is that once we have something set in place, then we can extend it with the feminist lens and bring it into policy so that there is something that's being done for our students and creating and affecting change in that way. So student surveys, we did have surveys for teachers, and it was the snowball method. So we had surveys and we invited other teachers to respond to those surveys, who then again forwarded it to others. And it was the same thing for students. There was criteria. Do you want to speak to the criteria?
Yeah, sure. Pretty much most of them were all situated in Ontario. One of the criteria is that they had to identify as a Sikh female. That was it, right? And so, and we'll speak more to that when we get the responses from our students and teachers, but that was pretty much it, and that that they're products of this Ontario system, Ontario education system. And so even the teachers and also the students. And so then what we did after that is took all the results that we got, we arranged them into themes, and then we're going to just talk a little bit about the themes in our discussion. And we have some other analysis with some education, but I thought for the scope of this presentation, we won't go to that total schools approach and all that. So I just wanted to show this. We're so glad that Harpreet found this picture and posted it on Core Life, and we're like, what? A picture of Sikh girls in 1946 in the Toronto Star? Very excited. But what we want to say with this picture is that Canadians, and because when we look at when we're looking at Sikhs in the education system, everybody calls them new immigrants. They're new. They're new. It's a new identity that's coming. It's something that's new. But Sikhs have been in Canada for ages, right? They've been here since the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so they're the largest visible minority population in Canada in 2034, Statistics Canada's. And so now we don't have Sikh data, but we have South Asian data, but it's easy to say that Sikhs play a big role they're a large component of the South Asian population. So by 2034, 78% of the population of Toronto will be an immigrant or a child. The denominations of religious is changing, and in 2006 there were 384,000 Sikhs. They were 1.2% of the population, and they're looking to grow to over 1 million by 2034. So did you want to?
So the point is that we matter, right? There is a population in Ontario, especially in Southern Ontario and Peel. We are visible, we matter, but it's not reflected in the policies. And education, we believe, is super important to affect change, and there needs to be a space.
Okay, we're going to be really quick now because we have very little time. So in the 1900s, when Sikhs were there were very discriminatory policies, the continuous journey policy. That means we're pretty much stopping immigration from Canada at all. Then the Multicultural Act, so then there was all this equity of access policies. But I just want to make one point here, is that everybody's talking about post 9/11. For Canadians and for us growing up, and our teachers that are mostly our age, our post 9/11 happened in 85, like after the Air India crash. And at that time, there was not time to organize. And every time the word Sikh came on television, it was connected with the word terrorist. There was never a time where Sikh terrorist was not mentioned. And so this is the context in many of the Sikh female teachers that grew up in Ontario. This is the reality they were growing up in while they were in school. So this whole there's a lot of internalized impression that you'll see in the quotes that you'll see that's being that you'll see. Equity inclusive strategy. So in 2009, there was an equity inclusive strategy. This forced all school boards to have a religious accommodation policy. This really recognized the fact that we had to have a policy for equity and diversity. And so that was really important. And that actually, and recognize that our system is not equitable. And so this gave power to teachers, gave power to policymakers in schools to be able to try to affect change. Okay, so here I'll do a little bit of a deconstruction there. So our province, we have the equity inclusive strategy, and I just talked about PPM 119. School boards, what they do is they take the PPM and they turn it into policies that are reflective for their schools and religious accommodation. And so then at the school level, the principals, they implement these policies based on their local context. And then in the classroom, what you would see is culturally responsive pedagogy that would meet. And so some of that could be instructional, the way we teach, and then some of that works when ourselves, right? So who am I? What are my biases when I teach? And how does that impact the students that I'm teaching? And so now if you'll notice that some of our teachers that have been there, and we don't have, and most of their context of who Sikhs are is through media, which is not very positive. So they already have a preconceived notion. And if you look at many Ontario school systems, the people that are teaching and people that are in leadership positions do not reflect the diversity, especially in places like Brampton, where there's 85% Sikh students.
And it is very top down. So the way policies are organized in the school context is in that one direction.
Okay, so just wanted to show Tina teaching in our classroom. So just a little bit, you feel free to read the quotes while we just kind of deconstruct them a little bit. So this is a student that talks about being a Sikh female in the schools. So it talks about the star being her Sikh identity and how that's such a really important thing. And it talks about where she gets her agency from. Her agency comes from her home. Her agency comes from the strong female fingers in her life.
Not so much from the school.
And not from the school. Yeah, that's missing. Again, this student was really interesting. Her agency comes from herself, right? I taught myself about Sikhism. My identity has shaped it, and teach others around. So what's so interesting about here is the responsibility required that I need to tell others about what Sikhism is and what that is. So then you'll see a teacher, and a teacher that grew up in the system, and these are the things that they're saying. And so this is them experiencing discrimination with the system. So just because of her name, she felt that she couldn't get hired into the system or had a harder time than everyone else. And that's proven. We already know that the name has a significant impact on getting into the system if you're a teacher. And that whole idea of her oppression she felt came from her parents and came from her home. Okay. The other thing is, so again, another one here is, we're looking at, you want to talk to that?
We're out of time, but very quickly is, we found a discrepancy between the teacher responses and the student responses. So people that were almost a generation ahead from the teachers, so people like Harpreet, myself, and other teachers that responded to the survey, they felt more oppressed and had less means of liberating themselves, even though we went through the system and we were successful products of the system. Whereas the students today are almost liberating themselves. Should I call it liberating?
They're more comfortable with themselves because I don't think they recognize that the system actually has a little more privilege than they recognize, right? Like, there are teachers that are Sikh. There are, you can talk about Vaisakhi at school, you know, and you can take that day off and it's okay. So not recognizing the spaces that they actually have. And I just want to talk a little bit about, this activity. So planning for success, sharing our journeys. We had and so talking about leadership. So looking at myself, my first year when I was stopped from talking in Punjabi to the students that were ESL, saying you are not allowed to talk to them in Punjabi. That's not helpful. To other experiences, where in the board that I taught at, 85% Punjabi was missing from the South Asian Heritage poster. So there's things like, and this is appeal, they're trying to be culturally responsive. Then we came up with a board-sponsored event where, it was Sikh role models that were talking to Peel board students. So, I just want to talk about the agency that was created. So here it is. All these Sikh women, and some of them are actually in this room today, talked about their personal narrative to girls. Just imagine talking about their personal narrative of being and their struggles and their challenges and their successes and how those girls would feel. So we just thought that was an amazing experience. So this has been in the board that we teach at for 2 years, and now I'm no longer teaching at the board. And guess what program is not happening this year? So so we have to institutionalize these supports. We have to institutionalize the thing. So we have to take one more minute. I'm so sorry. We just need to take. So over time, we just want to recognize that the agency for teachers and students have increased. And we've already been trying to deconstruct that little bit. And that whole idea is that the institution doesn't talk about, so we talk about a public education school system. However, and we talk about responding to whole identity. Many Sikhs wear their identity. And so we have to talk about faith in the public school system. We have to deconstruct this word secularism. We have to deconstruct that, and we have to really be responsive to our students. Because if we are going to meet the needs of all of our students, we have to talk about faith identity there. We also need to look at the policies in the education. So quickly, if we just look at superficial level things, we're not going to get to the bottom level, right? So for instance, like in hospitals in the GTA area, what we see is that 6 of the 12 hospitals, they have no gender disclosure to South Asians only, right? So, and those policies are discriminatory. And I mean, we can see why they're there, but you know, they're still discriminatory. And last but not least, the dominant discourse. So when we do talk about bringing curriculum into the Canadian context in the schools, what do we talk about? Well, let's talk about Kamagata Maru. Well, that's the boat full of men. Let's talk about Remembrance Day. But you know what I mean? Like, where's the female in that narrative? It's missing. When we're talking about the World Wars, we're also talking about men's stories. And so when we're talking about Sikh girls, where do they fit? Where's that Sikh female story? Sorry for going so much over time, but we had a lot to say. Thank you.